Hey YouTube, Jim here. Welcome to Top 10 Archive. Do you have a distrust for modern medicine? Maybe a distrust of the government as a whole? Whether or not it's a fear you should have, government experiments are certainly not unprecedented. So, how many could there possibly be? Well, enough for us to make an entire list out of them. Here are the top 10 scariest government experiments.
Number 10. Asian meat market dogs. If you're an animal lover, this one may be hard to stomach. The scientists from the U.S. government were buying cats and dogs from Asian meat markets in order to carry out taxpayer-funded kitten cannibalism experiments. What sounds like an Onion article actually holds quite a bit of weight. Known as the White Coat Waste Project, researchers have suggested that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has been breeding and using cats for studies since 1982. Parasites were intentionally injected into the animals so that scientists could study their effects day by day. I personally had to stop researching the experiment once I learned that animals were forcefully starved in order to study the effects of cannibalism. Number 9. Japan's Unit Number 731. Alright, so the US government isn't the only one doing some shady things out there. Let's talk about Japan. In the 1930s and 1940s, they did lots of medical testing on civilians in several countries, including China. As many as 200,000 people may have died as a result of these brutal experiments, which included purposely infecting people with cholera and typhoid, among many other horrible attempts at medical discoveries. The most tame of the experiments included being marched into sub-zero temperatures and then tested for the best treatment for frostbite. Some former members even admitted that prisoners would be put in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out, then dissected alive. While the U.S. wasn't directly involved, they did agree to keep the experiments a secret to make Japan a Cold War ally. Certainly one of the darkest eras in Japanese history. Number 8. Bat bombs. No, not bath bombs. During World War II, the U.S. Marines started trying to use bats as kamikaze bombers against the Japanese. You'll never guess where the idea started either. It originated in Pennsylvania, straight out of the mouth of a dentist named Lytle Adams. In 1942, after visiting the Carlsbad Caverns of New Mexico and, seeing bats, he thought, let's strap explosives to them and send them. The reason? Their echolocation. They could find roosts in barns and attics, get in there, and explode. The craziest part is the Marines actually went and captured thousands of bats, strapping explosives to them to try. Luckily, it didn't entirely work out, and in 1943, they put that back into the rough draft status. Number 7. New York prisoners. At a New York State reformatory prison, prisoners were put into two groups for very strange and unofficial experimentation. They wanted to know how a certain stomach virus spread and decided to find out by forcing one of the groups to swallow an unfiltered stool suspension, essentially poop. The other group just breathed germs that they somehow sprayed into the air. Conclusion? It was inconclusive. But that's probably because of the unconventional experimentation methods that were used. Number 6. DHS subway experiments. In 2016, to test the airflow of the New York subways in case of a bioterror attack, the Department of Homeland Security scientists decided to release gases and particles on the platform. They said it'd be non-toxic gases. They insisted that it was in everyone's best interest to know and understand what would happen if such an attack were to happen. They also boasted about the tool called DNA Tracks that would track the movement of these substances microscopically, not just in the air, but also in food. Number 5. Human experimentation in the Soviet Union. Of course, Russia has a dark past with government experiments. If you saw the movie Icarus, you know it's not above them to sponsor government official corruption and medical intervention. Back in 1921, the Soviet Union also got into prison experiments. Not the Stanford kind, in which no one was really in prison, but rather experimentation done on actual imprisoned people. They'd expose prisoners to deadly gases to find the tasteless, odorless chemical that could kill someone and then go undetected after death. They experimented on both men and women by tricking them into consuming it in food or drinks. Number 4. Effect of radiation on testicles. More prison experiments, this time on prisoners' testicles. In the states of Oregon and Washington in the 1960s and 1970s, dozens of inmates were put under radiation experiments to find its effects on testicles. They weren't entirely involuntary, but hardly something the prisoners could turn down. They were bribed with cash and possible parole. After they agreed, they received 400 rads of radiation, about 2,400 times what a chest X-ray would give you, in 10-minute intervals. However, no one had told them just how dangerous the experiment was, so much so that years later, in 2000, the participants received a $2.4 million settlement. Number 3. Fallout radiation. This 1954 study was called the Study of Response of Human Beings Exposed to Significant Beta and Gamma Radiation Due to Fallout from High-Yield Weapons. Quite a mouthful, even for an academic title, but it was on the study of humans accidentally exposed to what they call fallout radiation. What happened was that the government went through a nuclear test that had a bigger effect than expected. They accidentally exposed many and then decided to experiment, observing the severity of the injuries of those affected. Most say it was a decision made after the experiment's accidental effect, but others say the expansive injuries were planned all along. Results of the radiation were delayed but severe and included hair loss, skin and brain damage. Number 2. Syphilis in Guatemala. You may have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, but they were hardly the ones that were done so unethically on the topic. The U.S. also conducted worrisome experiments in Guatemala. A professor named Susan Reverby exposed the U.S. Public Health Service researchers who, between 1946 and 1948, deliberately infected prisoners in Guatemala and mental asylum patients with the disease. The goal of the study was to test chemicals that could prevent it. Their methodologies were varied, but went as far as paying the prisoners to have intercourse with infected sex workers and injuring their genitals, only to put infected bacteria on the wounds. Unlike in the Tuskegee experiments, these prisoners were given penicillin as a treatment, but they were also not informed about the experiment at all. Number 1. Human experimentation in North Korea. Of course, we couldn't go through government experiments without talking about North Korea. All the stories come from those who have been able to leave the communist closed-off nation, but allegedly, in one experiment done by the government, 40 female prisoners were given poisoned cabbage leaves and killed. Other experiments included surgery without anesthetics, beating prisoners over the head, and then using them for target practice. Even chambers where families would be mass murdered with gas. These experiments were said to have been done routinely to the point where a black van would pick up 40 to 50 people monthly from a camp to be experimented on. Thanks for watching. It's still mind-blowing to me what people are willing to do to each other, especially when it's sponsored by any government. What are some other G-backed experiments you know about? Let us know in the comments. If you haven't yet, become an archivist right now and join the many other people around the world we experiment on every day, trying to expand their minds by subscribing, clicking the bell, and giving this video a like. Bat bombs. Bat bombs. All right.